Hi, I'm John Sauvé. This is Art and Design. Today my guest is Peter Werby. Peter, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, John, for having me. A pleasure.
Peter, before we get into your most recent book, Summer on Fire, how did this book come about?
You know, I get asked that, and that's a good question. It kind of just grew organically. I had a broadcast on WRIF called Night Call. It went on for almost 50 years. It was the longest running phone-in talk show in American radio history, but it was only on once a week. Probably all I could stand. I don't know how these guys do it day in and day out. And I thought about my listeners, and I thought about the messages that I usually tried to get across in terms of trying to get a look at our lives and the politics of this country and the world, the environment, war. And I thought, well, maybe I could take a different format, a book. And I'd never written a book, but it's, you know what? The first book is pretty easy because you can, if you've done anything in your life, and maybe even if you haven't done too much, you can do it semi-autobiographically, sort of memoirish, if you will. So if you start writing, oddly enough, and I'd never written dialogue at all, it just flows. In other words, if you say, John walked in the room, Peter has to say, hi, John, and then, it just goes.
Or he doesn't.
Why didn't he? Yeah. So, I mean, maybe I had a lot of experience writing. I've written for years for the Fifth Estate newspaper, now a magazine in its 58th year, and I've written for the Metro Times, for national publications. In fact, my dear friend, who is on the back of Summer on Fire, Kara Hoffman, she said, even though she gave it a nice little blurb on the back, said, Peter, it reads like a Fifth Estate article. And I said, well, but I mean, what she means, though, is there's a lot of expository writing in here. There's a lot of Detroit history, but it's also, I think, and it's been doing well, so I guess there's agreement that it's engaging in that it has characters. It's set in 1967 in the summer. That's the Summer on Fire, which included the Detroit Rebellion, the riots that occurred then, but also lots of other goings on. And it's through the eyes of members of the Fifth Estate newspaper staff. So is it an autobiography, barely disguised? Yes and no.
Well, now, did you start with the Fifth Estate when it first opened?
Now, that was 1965. Harvey Ovshinsky, who is a legend in broadcast history, started when he was 17 or 18 years old, the Fifth Estate. And then 1966, I just happened along, my wife and I, Marilyn. In fact, the characters in Summer on Fire are Paul and Michelle, and people say, isn't it an autobiography? And I say, no. And they say, well, why'd you call it Paul and Michelle? Why did you call it like Art and Louise? Then people wouldn't think so much that it was you.
So basically, though, you started the next year after Harvey opened it up?
In 1966.
I'm going to say you were there as a founding member, okay?
Okay, you'll have to fight Harvey, but I'll accept it, yeah.
Well, I mean, as it's starting and as things are changing and just to go back to the preface of the book, too, we're talking 65, 66, 67 during this time period. There's a lot of change going on nationally as well as locally. And that's what's being captured in the book. But for you, where were you? Were you in college at the time?
Oh no, I mean, I'm, what's the cliche, older than dirt. No, I was, in fact, I was probably the oldest. I was 27 in 1967.
Some people are 27 in college. What's wrong with that, Peter? I spent a better part of the 80s there, okay?
I never could finish college. My ADHD was too severe. Yeah, no, I never completed a college degree.
But you're here. You're in Detroit.
Yeah.
You're living in the city at the time?
I was. We lived in Detroit. We lived right in the riot area. We being my wife and I, where we lived, but also the Fifth Estate office was right by Wayne State University. Our offices, in fact, were attacked by you're wondering who was going to do it. The rioters? No, by the National Guard, who fired a tear gas grenade through our windows and made the offices, the premises, unusable for about 2 weeks. It's nasty stuff, this CS gas.
Well, if you guys weren't such agitators,
Yeah.
what was the? Didn't Gary do a flag painting, or that they said they could see from the street?
No.
That wasn't the
Gary
premise.
Grimshaw.
Yeah, the premise to enter the building.
Yeah, they always had lots of excuses, right? Yeah, then people now were hosted. I mean, the Detroit Institute of Art. I'm sorry, erase that. Not the DIA, but MOCAD, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, and the Detroit Historical Museum, on the occasion of the Fifth Estate's 50th anniversary, had exhibits. So you would walk into the Detroit Historical Museum and find displays of these covers of the Fifth Estate. And I'm thinking, well, they used to want to kill us or jail us. Now they're honoring us. What does that say?
Yes, it does. It comes full circle.
Yeah, yeah.
But the Fifth Estate was one of the main, was the voice, really, along with some of the other seminal events that John Sinclair was having and that other people were having
Sure.
at the time that were part of the scene in Detroit.
John Sinclair and the Artist Workshop were a very prominent part of the Fifth Estate, and his columns, in fact, originally what were called the Coat Puller and then Rock and Roll Dope, when he got more into rock and roll than he did into jazz, although he remained true to that as well. He was bringing information that just wasn't available. I mean, if you can imagine the Detroit Free Press and Detroit News at that time were so stodgy, both visually and content. It was, for middle-aged white people, and the idea that there were people doing rock and roll at the Grandee Ballroom, or that there were experimental jazz at the Strata Cafe, or
Did you say this is 1967 or 2023? What are you talking
back-
about with the Free Press? Or
back
the
then.
Detroit News? Okay.
Back then,
All right, I
yeah.
wasn't sure because
Well, they're
both very descriptive.
Yeah, I mean, one of the influences that the so-called underground press, of which there were 500 regularly appearing publications like that by 1970, had great influence both on content and design for the mainstream papers. So instead of just having those chock-a-block columns, suddenly the Free Press started having a section called the Freep, which is their nickname, right?
Yeah.
And they started having a calendar of events. Could you imagine? Before that, if you wanted to know whether there was an art exhibit or that there was music, or other than the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and some, what do they call that? Not marching band, but
Yeah.
something like that. You wouldn't find it in the Free Press, but we had a full-page calendar of events. And the fact that it was called the alternative press as well as the underground press, it was really accurate. In the same way that counterculture, if you say somebody was the counterculture, you think of somebody with long hair and a beard, and now everybody has beards, I guess. But then nobody did. People would say, "Why are you wearing a beard?" Or
Hippie.
Why are you growing a beard? Why are you growing? I said, well, it just grows. But they suddenly the mainstream caught up with the alternative press, and now probably the mainstay would be the Metro Times.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's what's left right now, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But it's waves too, because at one time there was competitors to the Metro Times with Orbit and some of these other magazines that seem to be doing fairly well.
Yeah.
But print, when you walked in here, we kind of alluded to the state of affairs, whether we're talking about media or print, and yeah, it's always a challenge. And then keeping up with technology is a challenge. And why not just do a podcast as opposed to a place like this? Because they do it. That's
Yeah.
why.
Well, you know what? I always try to stay current, but I just had a thought of that old cliche about not teaching old dogs new tricks. I mean, I'm very computer savvy, if you will. Let me, whoa, what happened to our fifth estate?
I have it. I have it right
Yeah,
here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do this work, so I use InDesign and Photoshop and Illustrator and all of that. But when I start reading increasingly about what's online, I'm thinking, you know what? It's going to be print till the day I die, because it has legitimacy.
It does.
People want it. I don't know.
You can touch it.
Well, you're not exactly a young dog, I'm sorry to say.
Hey, wait a minute.
But, I mean, I want to hold something in my hand, and I want to be able to, I mean, there's a lot of print there, right? Which isn't too modern. And I want to, here is, we do a lot of art in the Fifth Estate, and this is actually Victor Bronner, you know of him, a surrealist painting from 1938. And I went, sure, you can look it online, but when you're usually going like that, and I began, I didn't realize what this painting was all about, but it's really about the interpenetration of opposites.
Stop, you're blowing my mind,
stop,
man.
I don't know if I can even deal. No, I mean, here, it's, is that things aren't separate and distinct, but have, it's like the yin-yang symbol. So this is both a man and a woman, together. So we both, sorry to say it, but we both have feminine qualities.
Well, you do, I don't, Peter. I don't know what you're talking about. How long have you been the editor of Fifth Estate?
Well, we don't have, actually there was a Harvey Ovshinsky and I were co-editors, but then we began in 60s style of having what was called an editorial collective. And that remains to this day. So we have 5 people, and now, of course, we're not in the same room. We don't have an office. We have an editor in Montreal and 2 editors in Seattle, and my wife and I are the editors here in Detroit. We make decisions collectively, which usually works well, sometimes doesn't.
But that's the beauty of it too, though.
Yeah.
That there's a discussion.
Yeah, right. And well, actually, I would say the editorial collective had more acrimony and arguments and people walking out in the editorial collectives in, say, the 60s and the 70s than we do now. We're pretty much all agreed now.
There's a lot of strong opinions in 1967.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Right.
So you've been editing this for quite a while, and then when did the idea of the book come out?
The book came, I retired in 2016. I should say I was retired, which is okay. A new owner came in for WRIF and WCSX, where my programs aired. And they just, I think partly it was financial, and because they let lots of people go. And I did what I usually do when I get fired, or when I used to get kicked out of school or something. Quote Martin Luther King, "Free at last, free at last." And some of the people at the station were almost in tears, and I thought, yeah, whatever. I'm still me. I still have stuff to do. And I don't know what the signal event was that made me start writing. But I talked to somebody and I said, how many words do you need? Like, usually we try to limit the word count in the Fifth Estate to 12 to 1,500 words, which isn't a lot. And I asked somebody, what do you want for a novel? And they said 80,000. So I talked to a friend of mine and they said, how long would it take you to write a 1,500 word article? And I said, I don't know, 3 hours, 4 hours. And they said, well, do the math. Take a few months. But I never could. I can't do anything for 3 or 4 hours except sleep. And it took a few months. I had some wonderful editors, beginning with my dear wife, Marilyn, but also some people, as I said, Carol Hoffman, who's written a number of best-selling books for Simon & Schuster. She helped me quite a bit. And as I say, she wanted to make what was called a proper novel out of it, which would not have any expository writing on it, because you would be showing through the characters rather than telling. For instance, there's just a small section about smuggling booze into the U.S. across Lake St. Clair when it was frozen in the winter. And probably and she was about to say, look, well, it's got good bones, you got good stories, you got good dialogue, good people, characters, and I'll submit it to Simon & Schuster for you. And I said, when? This was 2018 or 19. And she said, well, they would probably be talking about it in 2023 or 2024. I thought, huh? But you know what? And this is total arrogance. I thought, I want it like this. I mean, it was expository writing, and does it stop the flow of the story? Yeah, so what? You can get back to it after you...
Right, but it's you.
Yeah, and I'm not going to do another. I don't have another book in me. That's why you can tell a good novelist or fiction writer is they can write novel after novel after novel. If you press me, if you said, Werby, write another novel or we're killing your firstborn, I would say, well, let me think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
By when?
Yeah, I could do it. And I had a few ideas, but I thought, So I'm actually putting together a collection of essays I've written over the years, and that's called Eat the Rich and Other Interesting Ideas.
Sounds thematic. So, the publisher of this.
Black and Red, yeah.
Because you're going for Simon & Schuster, and then you said, well, I don't want to make changes, right? So.
Right.
And what was their approach when you approached them?
Well, they're friends. They've been publishing for 50 years in Detroit, mostly what I think people would consider fairly esoteric political tracks. There actually was another novel that they did, 35 or 40 years ago. And so, it was printed in the manner that they print all of their books. Now they too just operate online. So there's no paid staff, no budget for anything other than printing. So we were able to print it, and actually the publisher wants to always just charge 50% more than the print cost. So this cost about $4 to print. So she wanted to charge $6 for it. Would you say, that'd be nice? Wouldn't a lot of people buy it? Yeah. What's the rub? No store is going to carry it.
Right.
They're going to make $1 on it.
Yeah.
So, most people in public, it's $15.95, and most people said that I should have charged $18.95.
What are you, a capitalist now?
Well, no.
Come on, have you ever read this magazine? Don't you know what this is about?
And plus, so I don't take any royalties from this at all, and it all goes back to publishing other books for Black and Red. The last one, and I use this pronoun, we, because I've been working with the publisher, is Alan Franklin's book called The Lives of the Saints, which is not about the real saints, as you could imagine.
Can you give us a quick list of who's on the Saints list?
It's little vignettes. There's not people. Not well-known people. But Alan Franklin is the lead guitar of a band called the Layabouts. Do you ever?
I've heard of the Layabouts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's crazy little stories. I went to Carrie Lauren, whose wonderful bookstore, Bookbeat in Oak Park, has sold over 300 copies of this alone.
It'd be ground zero for this book.
Yeah, well, also Source Booksellers on Cass has sold over 300. That's very unusual. It's bestsellers in there. Well, the reason this has sold well, it was one, name recognition for my years as a public personality, but also because of the theme. If it would have been Jim Smith writing this, I don't think it would have gotten anywhere. But if it would have been Peter Werby writing about the 80s or the 90s, I don't think it would have either.
But you were there.
I was there, yeah.
So it's the source file.
Right. Oh, I was saying, Carrie Lauren asked me, what's Alan Franklin's Lives of the Saints about? And I said, well, it's really strange. I don't think I can define it. He said, I'm not carrying it. He said, I've heard that BS before. He said, it means, and I said, well, just look, and then he agreed as a favor to me, because I'm friends with Carrie, and it sold really well. And if you asked me to define what Alan Franklin's book's about, I'd still have trouble.
That's surprising that Carrie would say that, because he is the home
Sure.
of eclectic material.
Yeah, oh, he is indeed. Incredible bookstore.
My favorite. Yeah.
Both the bookstore source booksellers and Carrie's, you could go into both of them with your eyes closed and just randomly grab,
Right.
and you'd wind up.
Well, Carrie was great before the internet, and he's
Yeah.
still here after the internet. So that says something.
Yeah.
Because it was the place where you would find things.
Yeah.
So, and then it's Carrie.
Sure. 40th. He just celebrated their 40th anniversary. Yeah.
Did you have a table there?
I did.
All right.
I did with Alan Franklin.
All right. You
Selling
guys,
Lives
yeah,
of the Saints.
yeah.
Yeah, you can go to, by the way, maybe I should give some URLs for it.
Sure.
You can go to blackandred.org, and you can go to peterwerby.com, and there's the book on mine, and there's the books.
That's what we call shameless promotion, and
Oh
I
yeah,
love it.
I've learned that. You know, I always used to be, this contradicts itself what I'm about to say. I used to be modest.
I'm glad you're not anymore.
Well, I mean, it always embarrassed me to people to say, oh, you're Peter Werby, because I just always felt I was doing my work for the ideas that I hold and for the planet. And I never wanted to be a star, and I'm not. Or I mean, I guess some people react to me like I am. But I mean, you being in the art field, you know very prominent people, and you know they put their pants on just like you do, and they just happen to have particular skills or talents or abilities. And the same thing is with rock and rollers. When you're in the entertainment industry, you meet lots of famous people, and they're just like ordinary people, and I'm just an ordinary person. and if someone says, I appreciate the work you've done, I appreciate that what you've enunciated on the radio or in the Fifth Estate, or I love your book, I like that very much. It's, I mean, I don't know, it's called ego, like there's something bad around it, but I think it's good to be recognized for the work
You put time into
you
this.
do.
You care about it.
Yeah.
You saw it from start to finish.
Yeah.
And it's here for other people to enjoy. And shameless promotion, I form that as a high compliment. Don't take that wrong, Peter.
know.
My whole thing is, you're not doing it so that you can put it on your shelf. You're doing it so you can put it on other
Yeah.
people's shelf and relive a time period that you were a part of.
And the ideas in here about war, about violence, about race, about Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah. Listen, those all seem to be very popular today, too. It's just, I'm not reading it anywhere. And so to have this as a compendium that you can go back to and say, it's been here forever.
Well, it's a little depressing if you know, half full, half empty glass. Here, this is a book about 1967. What is it now? 56 years later. And are we still talking about war? Are we still talking about race?
Not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are they problems that have been solved?
Absolutely, they're not solved. But the,
Yeah.
the thing is, it's like, oh, I don't even want to go down this road, but, you know, Bob Seger, 2 + 2 is on my mind. I
Yeah.
played it the other day, and I'm like, it's one of the best protest songs
Yeah.
ever. But I'm not hearing any protest songs today. It's all sugary pop stuff, and, you know, who's capturing the zeitgeist in music? It's just, that's why I'm so happy that this is here and that you're talking firsthand about all this. There's so much change, monumental change that occurred at this time period. When we talk
Sure.
about Summer on Fire, it's a great resource to go back to and say, hey, why aren't we doing that now? Who's holding the torch? Who's, keeping this alive?
One thing too is that I mentioned I was putting together a collection of my essays, and I was thinking about writing the introduction, and I said that you have a grim read ahead of you. You go through my essays, but not so much here. There is material in here, particularly about the rebellion and the period of the riots. But there's lots of really funny stuff. Well, here, Michael Jackman, who was the senior editor at the Metro Times, he said, appealing vignettes intertwine a people's history and radical folklore of Detroit, including hilariously over-the-top encounters. A radical political novel that makes you laugh? Now that's revolutionary. So there's a lot of humor in here. People that know me say that there's sort of self-deprecating. At one point, the main character's sister said, "Well, aren't you just Mr. Know-It-All?" And stuff like that. But there's a lot about the Grandee Ballroom and the bands. Oh, in fact, a friend of mine who uses it as a class in rural Tennessee, which I just can't even imagine, said, he counted them up in the way that he would, and said there's 80 bands mentioned. So he made a Spotify soundtrack for it. So if you...
As a compendium to the book.
Yeah.
That's great.
There's also online footnotes at peterwerby.com, which are not necessary for reading the book, but everything it's important is absolutely politically accurate as I could define it. Some of the other stuff, like people are listening to WABX in 1967. Well, it didn't go on the air till February of 1968. And some of the ABXers are just outraged.
The purist.
Yeah. But what was I going to have them listen to? I could have had them listen to Keener or CKLW.
Yeah.
But you'd have to read.
That's
to
in
understand
Canada.
why.
Nobody wants to listen to them.
Right. The big 8.
CKL.
Yeah.
I got a little clip of that that's on my phone.
Ah.
And then it just kind of pops up.
Yeah.
Peter, one last part to my, it's an addendum to my shameless promotion. Again, where can people find out about the book?
Well, go to peterwerby.com, which has a list of sales points. You can get it through the evil one, if you prefer. That'd be Amazon. But it's so weird. Sometimes they have books available, sometimes they don't. But it's an e-book. It's also an audio book, which I don't understand. Why is an audio book more expensive than a print book? But if that's your deal, well, it's on Audible, so if you have a subscription. And Robin Eichley, one of the founders of the Artist Workshop, along with John Sinclair, is the reader.
Another reason to listen.
Yeah.
Peter, thanks. Sorry about that, it's contagious. Thanks for coming on the show today. I appreciate you coming on Art and Design. And again, Summer of Fire, go to peterwerby.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.